Hey everybody, Marcus here. So, like I promised everybody, I did find someone local that was willing to speak towards, well, issues pertaining to India, women, and the sort of subject matter we usually end up engaging in discourse in MGTOW circles. Now, obviously, like pretty much any other MGTOW video, this gentleman didn't want their voice to appear there, so there's not going to be any video, and I'm going to alter his voice though I'll try to keep mine, the original, but his voice will be altered throughout the video. So this is somebody who's local, so born and raised in India, has, I guess, a good deal of insights into what goes on here locally. From the conversations we've had, he has a numerous number of stories pertaining to adventures that happen in relationship to marriage and men and what happened to people he knows and friends and things like that. So he'll be sharing a bit of that. But I think what I wanted to do is to go over my experience in India and his experience of India as contrasted, someone Western versus someone local. So we're going to be covering more than just typical MGTOW content. And I think the first thing that I want to start with is, from a Westerner's perspective, when we think of India, we think, there was British rule for a while, and then you had Gandhi, and then Indian independence, and they were all non-violent and doing their own protesty stuff, finally winning independence for India. So maybe from your perspective, how do you view that whole setup of British rule and then historically how that led up to Gandhi and what really transpired, at least how you understand it?
Now, yeah, Gandhi was a character, and that has been described by many people in many books, most of them which are banned in India. And yeah, we attribute our independence to Gandhi wrongly, but we do so. Like if someone should be attributed with that, it should be Hitler and Subhash Chandra Bose. But no, we'll not be talking about that. Sure. Uh, Now, I say Hitler because it was ultimately the end of World War II which led to India's independence. Most of the people will not be able to make that connection. But it was not just India, it was India and other colonies under British Empire which were released from their rule in 1945, 46, 47, even Japan. And same happened with France because it was not economically viable for Britishers to maintain rule in these colonies. And
So
there were already revolutions brewing up.
right, so what you're saying basically is that Gandhi was just in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, well, he positioned himself in such a way. I'm not arguing that he was very much vocal about the non-violence movement and insubordination and non-cooperation movement. All of that happened. That did happen, and his main contribution was actually rallying up people behind that singular cause. He was able to include women, children, and all of them behind that non-cooperation movement. And you have to realize that at that point in time, many people were piss poor, were famished, and were suffering. They were not ready for a war. They even could not pick up arms in that capacity. Many of the well-fed people who could actually fight were already employed by the British militia, and their understanding was that there is no way that these people can be seduced to the other side. And that's the premise on which they ruled India, Indians against Indians. What Gandhi did was using Hinduism as the common cause. Like most of his slogans, which were constructed in the initial 1920s and 1930s, sorry, late 1920s and 1930s, were actually behind the idea of Hinduism. What he did using that was he rallied up the majority of the Indians behind that, but he alienated the Muslims and the Sikhs, which ultimately led to the creation of these separatist tendencies.
Okay, so you're saying that he's been active for at least 20 years. I mean, if Indian independence was post World War II, and you're saying Gandhi's operations in the 1920s, so that was a fairly long political process then that he was engaged in.
Yeah, he was engaged in that. He created the this non-cooperation movement, and then that led to the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, which basically said that the people who are not paying taxes to the Britishers, those who are not using their services, not paying for anything, running away from basically all the requirements of being citizens of British India, uh, they wanted them to stop because it was it was impacting British trade on a very large scale. So they came on to a pact. And during that time, this was the rise of Bhagat Singh, and he reached the heights of popularity at par, maybe even exceeding the popularity of Gandhi at that time in 1930s. And many people argue that if Gandhi wanted, he could have stopped his execution. Although Bhagat Singh was not praying for that, he was not the one even. He was not even amicable to the idea of a plea, but the Indians said most of the Indian youth came behind this idea of extremism, behind which was a complete contrast of the Gandhi-led movement of non-violence. That okay, yes, this is what we need to do. He basically blew up bombs in some courts, and he was caught and was going to be tried for that.
Right. So you're saying, maybe let's back up a bit. I mean, there must have been a thirst for independence even preceding Gandhi, right?
Yep.
So he didn't enter this situation and then build up the rhetoric towards it as if nobody already wanted this, right?
No, people wanted it, but no one was able to do anything about it. There were already extremists who were planning stuff, but no one was able to mobilize the Indian public in that capacity. That the normal human beings, every day to day, like hawkers and even the beggars and children being involved in this movement, that was done by Gandhi, sure. And he was the reason that everyone came behind this idea. But the same thing was then achieved and contrasted by Bhagat Singh when he and his associates were caught in these bombing of the assemblies, and at that point, the popularity of Gandhi became low, and everyone was able to understand that he cannot bargain on the table. Even the promised roundtable conference, he was not able to oppose what the other side was putting up with. Like the Viceroy Irwin at that time was putting up on the table. So people started losing faith in Gandhi. That was the story. And if he wanted, sure, he could have done that. But his argument was that if I try to bargain the release of these extremists, then we might lose the deal that we are getting. The
Right.
deal was basically removal of taxes on certain products and working for profit of the people, like basic commodities like salt, right? That was one of the biggest tradable commodities at that time, which was taxed by the British, and that was controlled by the British Empire. So the removal of tax from that. So these basic things which we were getting in the bargain, his idea was that we should get that.
So what you're saying, I mean, there was two active movements there, and there was an extremist side of things that
Yep.
was achieving something or other, and then there was a more peaceful, more moderate approach that Gandhi was doing. So how did those two forces interplay?
Yeah, I think they both complemented each other, but they were radically different ideas. Gandhi, who then led the Indian National Congress, uh, called different at that time, was for the idea of transfer of power from the British Empire to India with minimalistic socio-economic reforms. The extremist movement, which soon began to be led by Bhagat Singh, was for the idea of a socialist society.
Okay, so you're saying that, okay, so you got this Bhagat Singh character, which is leading this kind of up in arms, revolutionary, like Bolshevik style
Yeah.
uprising in India. Then you had Gandhi on the more peaceful side, and the more violent ends of it didn't seem to work out that well.
Yeah, the violence end of it seemed to work out at that point, but these were the leading characters. When they died, the movement died. There were still guys who were extremists, but there was no one that they could rally behind. The guy who came after him was basically Subhash Chandra Bose, and he became the leader of Congress in 1939. And Gandhi ousted him. He won the election twice, and Gandhi ousted him at a later stage. He was for the idea that in late 1930s he came about to become the head of the party. In 1939 he said that okay, we should start this. That was a time when the World War II starts, and the idea was he saw this as an opportunity that now we give an ultimatum. We launch this insubordination and non-cooperation movement again, and we give a 6 month ultimatum to the British Empire, right? Gandhi didn't like the idea because it was coming from someone else, right? It was not his party anymore, and that was his problem. Again, in 1929, there was another incident. In 1929, I think, uh, the party declared independence. So basically, there was going to be the rise of arms and everything, the whole revolution growing up. And Gandhi says, no, that I don't like the idea of India becoming completely independent, which could have been achievable at that point, arguably. And he said that I would prefer to go for dominion under the Britishers.
Right. So Gandhi chose British rule in 1929 over independence.
The decision was changed in 1930, I think.
Okay, okay, hold on. So let me get this straight in terms of elections, because you're saying running of the party. So what was the name of the party that Gandhi was involved in?
That was Congress.
Okay, and how did that work? How did elections work in India during the time of British rule? I mean, you were elected as what, and then you reported to whom as part of the British Empire?
Oh no, these are the parties formed by the people to lead the movements. Right, these are committees basically. And they interacted in some capacity with Britishers to put forward the demands and stuff and lead the movements. But these are not the parties which basically ruled the country
Right.
or ran the
So these
country.
were separatist parties, basically vying
Right.
for independence. Okay, okay, gotcha, gotcha. So maybe because Gandhi's pretty much on every single banknote that I've seen here in India so far. So I mean, there's a level of reverence for him, and there's been a lot of at least. Hollywood media that portrays him in a very positive light and all that. So, but from a local's perspective, what is the perspective of Gandhi himself and how he played things out in India?
Yeah, I mean, he's still so the mainstream media that you see, it's again the victors writing the history. So you the stuff that we read in our history books is the same as you would find in the books that you will read. So uh, it's still taught to people that okay, yes, Indian National Congress was responsible for independence, that yeah, Gandhi led this movement and all of this happened. Now interestingly, if that were the case, then in 1942 they led this same thing which Subhash Chandra Bose was actually saying at that time in 1939, that we should give the 6 month ultimatum and we should launch this non cooperation movement. Now, in 1942, that carried on. Gandhi did the same thing now in 1942. That movement carried on for like 3 weeks. Then most of the leaders of International Congress were arrested and put in jail, and they were in jail till 1945. The movement died at that time. There was no one actually going for this. What happens in 1945, 1946 is that they come to an agreement with the Britishers, with Attlee at that time, with the chosen prime minister of that time of India. Now he agreed that okay, yes, we'll give you independence. The reasons are now, interestingly, it was asked to B.R. Ambedkar, one of the other leading politicians of the time in 1955, that why do you think we achieved independence in 1947? And he says, well, I don't know, because there was no particular reason that why this will happen. Uh, because the movement had literally died, and there were very few people still running with this idea. The people who were doing it were actually outside India, led by Subhash Chandra Bose, Indian National Army. He formed a different sort of an army at that point.
So if that was the case, if I mean, if people are recounting the independence of India being as a what an accident?
Yeah, it's not an accident. People don't recount it as that. This is the people who are read up will actually talk about it like that. Most of the stuff that we read, it is the same stuff that you will find in your texts. That yes, it was Gandhi who led to the independence. It was not that. It was the idea uh, which Attlee wrote in his autobiography, or maybe said to someone, which came out decades later, is that it was the idea that someone, so basically Subhash Chandra Bose seduced certain members of the Indian army, which were Indians, not just Hindus, mostly comprising of Muslims actually. He seduced them to his side, took them out, and was fighting from Japan's side. He took the whole army out, he got refuge in there, and the idea that someone was able to do so can actually rile up a revolution, and it was not economically viable for Britishers at that point. So if someone comes to them with an agreement that, okay, yes, can you please give us independence? So yeah, that was the point that, okay, sure, why not?
Okay, so let me get this story straight. So, post World War II, the British Empire is weak. They don't have the resources to control and govern India anymore. You have this other Indian general operating outside of Japan or somewhere that built up an army somehow, mostly composed of Muslims, and just basically went to the British Empire and said, "Hey, we'll let you leave peacefully, but if you don't, we're gonna beat you out of India."
Not him. But the idea that someone was able to do so was the idea that, okay, it is possible to do so. So someone can rile up the whole army against him, and they already. So after World War II, if you look at the British budget and what was allocated and what the militia actually got, only 25% of the allocated budget was actually dispensed in British Empire. That's how poor they were at that time.
Yeah.
No wonder why they had to steal our gold and diamonds.
So I guess Indian independence then in this rendition is won in the same way that most freedoms are won, through threat of force of arms or force of arms itself.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that is why it said that these complementary movements were required. They were already frustrated that they were not able to make profit due to all these non-cooperation movements happening repeatedly again and again. And at the same time, they had this threat which was brewing outside and inside, and so ultimately it was not economically viable for them anymore. It was basically, as it started in the beginning, from 1600s, it was always a company which was operating for profit reasons in India.
Okay, so I guess all that hunger striking and all that was kind of more smoke and mirrors than actually effective.
It it was effective in rallying up the people. It was effective in creating a situation where they're not able to create profit, right? So yeah, that was a factor. But if someone says that it was Gandhi who is directly responsible for this, then I have to counter that idea.